what should
Because
probably...
we wanted to mourn the loss of Dick Cheney.
Oh, mourn him, yes. Mourn that he never made it to The Hague, I think, is the only thing that we should really mourn.
We mourn that he never suffered at the level that would have been proportionate to the suffering that he has caused. That's what I think.
Well, he certainly caused a lot of it. And I thought long and hard about what was the best way to sort of capture the reaction. And the reaction, for the most part, was what you would have expected it to be. But I do think that this reaction from AIPAC is probably the one that says it best. AIPAC mourns the passing of Vice President Cheney, who was a strong supporter of the U.S.-Israel partnership. Of course he was. As Vice President, Secretary of Defense, and during his years in Congress, don't forget he was a congressman, and he was the Secretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush, and then selected himself as the Vice President. Never forget that. Dick Cheney worked to strengthen the ties between the two democracies. Yes, some democracies. We extend our condolences to his family and those who worked with him over many years in public service. And as we can see, as you scroll down slightly, Colin, the former VP, Dick Cheney, who served the 2 terms under former President George Bush, has died. He was 84 years old. And, you know, W was diplomatic in his thanking the real president of the United States for making sure that he didn't lose his ass while he was in the White House. Kamala Harris celebrated Dick Cheney. Hillary Clinton celebrated Dick Cheney, and a host of many others in the Democratic establishment. Because why wouldn't they? That's the greater story here. While everybody's caught up with a handful of elections that happened today, let's bear in mind that the people who have an opinion about Dickhead Cheney and what he did to this country, I don't think any bureaucrat ever had I mean, I think Cheney had a greater impact in the worst way than even Kissinger did. Like, he really was evil incarnate in the worst way.
Yeah, I think also what happens with people like Cheney and a lot of people that are continuous or contiguous through multiple different administrations, people don't realize where they were before their most current administration, right? Like, so this is somebody who was an architect of so much evil and colonialism and imperialism and just American bullying around the world long before he was vice president under W. So, I mean, these are not people that just come out of nowhere. I mean, one would argue that he's who chose W. And that was how that even came to be, because he was always the brain in that, scary as that is.
I put out a statement earlier today on my personal page, which I rarely do. Said, this past week, I visited the George W. Bush Presidential Library while on business in Dallas. As I walked the grounds of the SCOTUS-selected president, I was reminded of the true horror that was 9/11 and what followed. The Iraq War, war in Afghanistan, the Patriot Act, Halliburton, the housing crisis, the estate tax, the torture program at Gitmo, and much more. The person who tied it all together was Dick Cheney, arguably the most vile bureaucrat in our nation's history. The man selected himself as W's VP and ran this country into the ground in many ways. To those liberals who tried to rehabilitate his image the last several years, shame on all of you. And to the war hawks and Zionists celebrating him as a pro-Israel war hero, to hell with all of you. May Cheney's death usher in neoconservatism's end, America first, and free Palestine. Now, I'm not going to name the person, although you'll probably have an idea of who would write such a thing.
I was going to say, who wrote that?
Oh, I wrote that one, but there's another one that I want to read for you guys. And this.
Yeah, the Patriot Act. Somebody's talking about the Patriot Act. Ugh, I read that thing. It was brutal.
And that's why we all believe and will always believe, regardless of what the State Department will ever reveal to us, that 9/11 was an inside job, because that is a piece of legislation that they desperately wanted to pass forever. And then 9/11 happens, and then they pass it almost immediately.
Right. So again, my point is somebody like a Dick Cheney was involved in the creation of that act long before it was ever able to get passed. Like if you go back to even when, I think it was when Reagan was in office, and look at the parts that people in that administration and in that time, where was Dick Cheney? Where was Rumsfeld? Where were all these people? They were there. They were there. They were waiting in the wings. They were forming that plan. So, you know, it was not just all of a sudden. And W was just the easiest puppet for them to find to put in there after they waited 8 years to wait out Clinton. Although one could argue, why would they even wait out Clinton when at the end of the day, they're all on the same team anyway? I guess just the facade was different then. They wanted to keep that more of that two teams thing going, you know, had to keep up that really good facade.
I mentioned that you have these liberals, if you will, that like to comment on these tragic events from their perspective anyway. And I have always said that this is always a class war, nothing more. The person who wrote this lives a very comfortable life, is a Democratic Party supporter through and through, and says the following. Former Vice President Dick Cheney's passing reminds me that even when we disagree politically, we can still respect those who served our country with conviction. I didn't agree with many of his policies. Many of his policies? Which ones did you agree with? Nor with all of his daughter, Liz Cheney. So you know this is the type of person who would have loved Liz Cheney to have been the VP for Kamala Harris. But I admired that both believed deeply in protecting the Constitution and standing up for what's right. What part of the Constitution did Dick Cheney protect when he started an illegal war in Afghanistan and Iraq?
Well, let's see. It's a violation of Articles 1 and 2. It was a violation of, yeah, I mean, and then the Patriot Act took away Amendments 4, 5, and 6. So, yeah, I'm going to say he wasn't really a big constitutional enthusiast.
No, I don't think he was. And then, of course, you have the Halliburton war profiteering, which is, that alone should have put him in federal prison for life, put him in The Hague. How about the housing crisis? Allowing the multinational corporations to screw us even harder as a result, although that Obama bears as much responsibility as Bush does, as far as I'm concerned. But again,
to me, Obama is worse than Bush for a lot of reasons. Personally, to me, I find Obama to be worse. We got everything I expected we would get with W.
Yeah.
And then some, but like he was a moron. I lived in Texas when he was a governor. He was a moron. So I had very low, if any, expectations. So he satisfied that perfectly. Obama's a whole different story. Obama was like, as far as I'm concerned, was a fraud. So that's a whole different thing.
And the key point of this line was, I admired that both believed deeply in protecting the Constitution and standing up for what's right, even when it wasn't popular. Wow. In the end, his love of country ran so deep that he even supported Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, who would have been just as pro-Israel, if not more so, in a much more subtle way than Donald Trump. But let's not acknowledge that part. Putting principle over party. Dick Cheney always did what he thought was best for America, and he raised a daughter who carried that same courage and integrity forward. Has anybody ever checked Liz Cheney's voting record when she was in Congress? Whether we shared his politics or not,
But she was gay. But she was gay.
Well, that's important to people like this. We can honor his decades of service, his devotion to country, and the example of conscience he left behind. May he rest in peace. There are millions of people that voted for the Democratic Party this evening, probably Andrew Cuomo as well, that feel the exact same way that this person, who I will not name, feels about Dick Cheney. Because in the end, as our friends at Due Dissonance say, scratch a liberal, a fascist will bleed. And that's what you have, which is why somebody like this person would write such a glowing obituary about Dick Cheney. Which means that there is no, you can never go too far. There's no such thing. Now, I know this is going to be somewhat of a cheap plug because that's what we do. Not really. But if anybody can actually say what needs to be said regarding the death of Dick Cheney, it's Senate candidate Graham Platt.
Graham Plattner here. Usually when a former vice president passes, we all take some time to mourn. As a veteran of the Iraq War, I'm going to say, no, not this time. Over the next couple of days, I'm sure there are going to be thousands of think pieces written about his legacy. But the only legacy that we have to remember is that he wasted thousands of young American lives, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives, and trillions of dollars for absolutely nothing. If we take anything away from this, it should be that we need to build a politics that keeps the politicians like Susan Collins, who support illegal foreign wars like the one in Iraq, accountable and get them out of office.
So now we have people in the comments saying about Graham's another war criminal. I mean, I'm not going to buy into that. And the reason I'm not going to buy into that is because I know how desperate the Democratic Party is and the oligarchs are to get rid of him. And so that makes me just like him more.